architect that we received.
Oh, Michaela, next week too.
You ready, Charlie?
Well, I just thought you should know what's going on.
Did you have fun on your camp?
You ready to go?
Okay.
Okay, we are going to call the city council meeting to order at 7 o'clock. We do not yet have a quorum for the P and Z, so you guys can hang out and watch. Hopefully, we will have another member show up before the public hearing, so the public hearing will count. Because if not, you can still hang out and watch, but it won't count as an official meeting or official hearing for P and Z. So, we'll start with roll call for city council members.
Alec Robinson.
Brooke Brown.
Kevin Glasheen.
Phil McDuffie.
Sarah Hudson. We also have Charlie Zeck. I don't know who else we have up here. Okay. From your office, I
Yes,
assume?
she's the
Yep.
planner.
Okay. Nikki Stotzenberger, Alan Thomas is in the back, and Michaela is also back there. So, and then
I'll call roll call.
P and Z members who are here.
It's just established, yeah. I'm gonna call roll call for planning and zoning. Dave Bench,
Jeannie Nyer.
Jerry Fleming.
okay? We do not currently have a quorum, that we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Right. Okay. First thing would be public comment. Do we have anybody signed up for items not on the agenda? Okay. All right, then we will go to agenda item number. Okay, we're gonna start with agenda item number 3 then. Oh, no, that's the one we just, that is number 3. Okay, number 4, presentations. Presentation by Alter Studio regarding the assessment of residential building height and proposed height measurement using properties located at 2403 Bettis Boulevard, 5 Rockway. It doesn't say this, it's actually 5 Rockway Cove. 4715 Timberline Drive and 4902 Timberline Drive. So who is, okay.
All right. Yep.
Recording in progress.
And I need a share screen, right?
Can you identify yourself, please?
Yes.
To start.
Hi there, I'm Samuel Alamo. I'm an architect at Alter Studio Architects here in Austin. Let me share. Alrighty, so I'm essentially going over the presentation I gave a couple weeks ago at the PNZ meeting. I'll try to keep it brief, and then maybe you guys can ask questions in more depth. So we were asked to study, diagrams for these 5 lots, and I'm just going to briefly go over them for this current property, 4902 Timberline, and then we can flip through the others so you can see the differences. But I think it's more helpful to just discuss over one for now. So let's stick to the 3 on the left here, just for a quick brief description. We were asked to do 3 diagrams. The one closest to us, where my mouse is looking at the parallel planes diagram, which takes the topography and just brings that up 35 feet to its max height. And then at the building setbacks, it's actually 25 feet on the side lot. And so it staggers up 1 foot over, 1 foot up, 1 foot over, 1 foot up, until you get from 25 feet to 35 feet. So that's that blue zone you're seeing there. These next 2 tents are pretty similar. The only difference is the one closest to me, where my mouse is hovering, starts from the building setback, and the one further from me over here starts from the property line. And so what these tents show is something similar to what Austin currently has, which is 40-foot increments or segments starting from the building line towards the front of the property, and you have 40-foot sections going backwards until you reach a section's smaller than that, and that just goes to the end of the lot. And in those cases, you go up 15 feet from the setback or the property line. Well, let's stick to this one. It goes up 15 feet from the up 25 feet from the building setback, and then up at a 45-degree angle, creating these tents that you see, and that starts to create the building envelope that you can build within. This third diagram, as I kind of misspoke earlier, starts from the property line, but goes up 15 feet and over at a 45-degree angle. So what these two diagrams don't show, that's pretty self-evident with the parallel planes, is that you have to establish the maximum height, because they just go at a 45-degree angle kind of indefinitely until they meet a point. But that's much higher than 35 feet. So that's kind of why there's so many options for the two alternates off to the right here. Is these you have to establish from some given point what 35 feet off of grade is. So this one in yellow here is showing the tent overlaid with a parallel plane max 35-foot height limit. So that's the yellow is the parallel plane, and then the interfacing with the blue 45-degree angle tent, giving you your workable building area. And then these off to the right are different alternatives, and we kind of study them quickly just to see some options. But I think that's if you go in this kind of direction, you have to decide where you want to pick your point from. The green tents here on the left are picking the high point of any one of these given sections and going 35 feet from there. The next two in red are picking the low point from any one of these 40-foot sections and going 35 feet from there. And then these off to the right, sorry, some of these are overlaid from last meeting. These are picking the high point in green and the low point in red, but from each given section. So the actual buildable tent area steps down, as you go down the property. So that's the quick overview, and I can show you guys the other properties just to quickly explore them, and then maybe we can go for questions. So this is 4715 Timberline, which shows a diagonal slope from the front yard up to the back right corner of the property. 2403 Bettisham, or I think there's a typo there, Bettis, which is a relatively flat lot, but it's a corner lot. So it has a slightly different configuration and a slightly different way that the edge is addressed because it's a corner lot, so it's kind of only has the one tapering side, at least on the parallel planes. And then there's Rockway, which we discussed last time, which is a very odd shaped lot, and in our opinion, this is kind of where the parallel plane started to show some of its strengths, because it's very straightforward. Even on a lot like this, you can just extrude the lot, but when you get into tenting an odd lot like this, there's certain rules that have to be set up for you to decide what, how to orient the tents, where you actually get the points from, and you get into some very funky geometry on a lot like this, trying to make sense of a tent situation. So yeah, just going back to 4902, I think that's a brief explanation of these, and I think it might be better for questions, so I don't get into the weeds on some of these other alternates, if that's okay, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that okay?
So in your experience in the Austin area, which of these methods are being used by most jurisdictions?
In Austin, we have something that's a lot more similar to those back two, which is the tenting at a 45-degree angle, which in Austin, I feel like it makes some sense because there's a lot of tight lots, and there's a big reason, or you know, there's a kind of a compelling reason to how to explain it. to kind of guide the size of these homes. To my understanding here in Rollingwood, you guys have much larger lots. So the condition at the edge of the lot is what's most pressing, and how a home might affect its neighboring property. So the simplicity of the parallel planes makes sense to us, but what we currently have, which I personally don't love, but it's a kind of convoluted Austin system with the tenting, with a series of exceptions for the tent because of the tight lots and the nature of that, the constraining nature. Yeah, sorry. I don't. It was kind of a poor answer, but yeah, we use the tenting in Austin. That's similar to this, but with a lot more exceptions than this would provide.
What about Westlake Hills, where there's more slope, like Rollingwood?
I'm slightly unfamiliar with what they use in Westlake.
They actually use parallel plane.
Okay.
Would you comment a little bit about with using the approach that Austin would use? What would you have to go through to accommodate the Rockway model? What you said that was difficult. So what do you do?
Yeah, so sometimes for an odd lot like this, an architect would typically have a preliminary plan review with the city to go over the site so that they can actually explain and kind of walk through the best way to interpret a site like this, so that you can so everyone's on the same page and you're actually going on one set of interpretations. Because based on the lot shape, it varies. So it's kind of up to the reviewer and the architect to interpret. So if you have a preliminary plan review, then you can get on the same page. But I think, like I stated before, the simplicity of the parallel plane, at least for architects, is compelling because you're just extruding, and everybody has a survey to start from, and every architect has access to technologies and modeling services like this, where you can just extrude that and create a simple boundary, where the tent is straightforward on a very traditional, like maybe a 50 by 100 foot lot, for example. But anything when you start getting into a very very sloping site, or a lot of topography, or an awkward or different shaped lots, then it starts to get a little confusing and up for interpretation.
I have a question. It looks like with just a straight up tenting proposal, where in your example where you start at 25 feet and you said go up either 45 degrees or 1 foot of height for every foot in from the setback, which would be the same thing, right? That it would go up to some unpredictable height depending on the size of the buildable area. I guess it's going to go up to a height that's like equal to the width of the buildable area. But anyway, it could go very high.
Yes.
It could be 50, 60 feet on a lot in Rollingwood.
Yes.
And so you're showing us a hybrid proposal which has some tenting. It starts at 25, goes up to 35, but then runs into the parallel plane that overlays it. And would you call that tenting with a parallel plane overlay, or what?
Yeah, this second one here with the yellow, that was the it's a tenting, and then what sets the top height is actually the topography.
So a maximum height from the grade below is 35 feet, but otherwise you could start at 25 and then get an extra foot of height every foot that you move in from the setbacks. But you don't need the tenting part of it on the side of streets, for example. Like you say, where you have a side of a house facing a street, you wouldn't have the tenting requirement.
Correct, because you're already, I think you're already going to be 30 feet back, and in the rear property you're already 20 feet off the setback. So it's really containing the portions of the lot where you can get kind of close to your neighbors.
Well, I would say I agree on the street, because the street gives you extra distance from your neighbor, and on the front, which gives you extra distance from your neighbor. But On the back, 20 feet's not a lot, for two houses that could be 35 feet tall.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about it, 40 feet, 35 feet, it's a box, it's a hole, or a canyon almost. And I could see tenting being on the back of the lots too, being an aesthetic benefit for privacy.
Yes, and I believe that's what Austin has. Austin also has a rear tent.
And do they do a 1 foot of height for every foot in? Or
It's a 45
which
degree
is
angle.
exactly the same
The
thing.
same thing, yeah.
Right.
Saying what's their maximum height, 45?
Austin
Yeah.
is 32, I believe, 32.
Is it? Okay.
And if it's not, it's 35, but it's I'm
No,
pretty
it's
sure
32.
32.
And I
okay.
think West Lake Hills was 32.
It's 30 and can be 32,
Okay,
yeah, depending. 25% slope. Yeah,
okay, it can go up to 32.
they give you, they give you a 2 foot break.
Okay. All right. That's my questions for the moment. Give somebody else a turn.
Sam, can you merge those two together so you can see the differences?
Yeah, which ones?
Anyone, whichever looks best to you.
Like we did at the previous meeting,
Yeah.
something
Yeah, I
like,
thought that was very good.
yeah, to kind of see the difference in, yeah, exactly. So you can see, you know, whether you want to go at an angle, 45 degrees, or if you want to step it up with the topography. You know, a lot of these, the difference between the two, like the difference between a parallel plane and the tenting, in most cases, I would say, they might vary where you have a very, very extreme slope, but the differences between the two methodologies are not far off. So in some areas, you're going to have, you know, a little bit more height, as you can see there in that kind of zone here. You're going to have a little bit more potential buildable area here, but that's just one case. You might have a little less area in another place. But overall, when you do overlay the two methodologies, you know, they tend to follow themselves, or they tend to follow a similar envelope. It just depends on where you want to take your calculation from. And if you want a clean, you know, line, or if you want to just use the topography.
And so to clarify, you would have, for each segment, you would have to choose which corner you want, whether it's the high point, the low point, the midpoint, and then you have to do that for each section?
Yeah, you know, there's a variety of ways. Like let's take these two for example. One, you can take 1 point from the entire lot and create one max height limit, or you could have a max height limit per section of tent, 40 foot segment, which means your max height limit would step down with the tenting, or you could pick 1 point and go up, which I think is closer to what you guys have now. One clean plane at the top, but you'd have to decide where that is set from.
I think what would happen is if we had decided that we wanted to go with a segmenting method, that we would need to write the ordinance to establish that it would always be a high point within the segment or a low point or some average in between, because that's how it would have to be written. We couldn't just make well, let's see what the lot is and then make a decision based on that. It would have to be written into the ordinance clearly.
Does one offer a substantial advantage over the other?
I guess speaking from our experience, you know, as the architect's standpoint, I think personally the parallel plane does, just because it's simple in nature, it's easy to model, and it's easy for I think it's easy for everyone involved to understand what the point is, or where the high point is relative to the grade below it. Whereas if you have the tenting, there is some portion of that's up for interpretation. So that's just from our personal experience.
And And elaborating on the interpretations, you said you get into maybe conflicts with, well, you want to elaborate a little bit?
Well, it's kind of like the awkward lot. The awkward lots are definitely up for interpretation and how to determine the tent. And on a simple lot, like I said, in Austin, like a very standard traditional lot, it's fairly straightforward, the tenting, given they have a lot of exemptions in Austin, which kind of adds to the process of making it complicated. But on a very standard lot, it's not all too complicated. But on an odd lot, it's definitely simpler for the parallel planes. And I think in general, I think we spoke about it last meeting, with the parallel plane, at any point on the lot, you could take a 35-foot measuring pole or survey tool and just measure at any point along the property if your building is higher than the upper limit. So that seems pretty compelling to me.
I have a question too, if you're done with your line. So what would you say to somebody who says, tenting is tough for somebody with a severely sloped lot because, they would have to step their house up or down across the grade, and they, might not like split level houses? Is that too bad you're on a sloped lot? Or would you say, okay, if it drops off 20 feet and you want your roof line to be level, it'd be 15 on one, or it'd be, if it drops off 20 feet, it'd be 15 on one side and 35 tall on the other side. Does that make sense as you go across say a grade across a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a severely sloping site, typically you work with it, and there's benefits to that and there's negatives to that. I don't know if either of these tenting solutions will give you much of a different answer.
And if you have a really severe slope, I guess you could deal with it by special exception.
Yeah, I guess if that's allowed in the code,
Yeah.
some kind of variance or something.
If it was written into the height ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I have a question.
Yes.
With the segmenting approach, I think Austin has, the lot is segmented from the front of the property, in 40 feet, and then whatever's left.
Yes.
What's the magic of the 40 feet? Or is there any magic to that? What is being attempted by having the segments at 40 feet?
I'm not all too sure, to be honest. What dictates the 40-foot rule, or how they landed on that segment?
All right.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
You mean you,
Austin's got some other, restraints, articulation, and those are based on 40-foot intervals. I don't know if they're tied together, or that's, they went, okay, our articulation requirement is a 40-foot interval, let's apply that to the tip.
Yeah, like I said, there's tenting, but there's a lot more, not only exceptions, but like he was saying, the sidewall, they have like something called sidewall articulation. So if you have a two-story portion of building that's longer than, say, I think 32 or 40 feet, some portion, then you have to set back the building, 4 feet and 10 feet to create a break in the facade to avoid from having, a big blank or a big kind of unassuming building on your neighbors. Yeah, big wall, yeah. So there's some, and I think again, that kind of, on a tight urban lot, that, there's some sense to that. Maybe less so on a bigger, lot where you have more room to play.
So I could see where like a gable that's 35 feet tall on the side yard is not as offensive as, say, a straight 35-foot wall with a flat roof that runs the length of the, buildable area that creates that big wall facade that you're talking about, or large facing facade. Would you recommend any limitations on those big, tall wall facades? Should you let the 35 feet be built the entire length of the buildable area on the side yards, or would you limit it to a certain percentage of the side yards to not just get some articulation in the wall, but to get some vertical relief, or maybe 25% of it goes up to 35 feet, but 75% doesn't go above 25 feet, or something? You know what I'm saying? Something
Yeah.
like that.
And I think with all three of these options, you won't ever be able to build a 35-foot building at the side lot because of the 25-foot
The tenting.
the
yeah.
tenting
Okay.
or the terracing of the parallel planes. You
Okay.
would on the front facade because you're
Yeah,
setback,
okay.
and then I
Makes
guess
sense.
you would on the back of the property,
Okay.
unless you had you could terrace up from the back as well.
Right.
If that's a concern, a lot of
I think it is for me.
yeah, a lot of rear facing lots, it's the same as a side lot to a
Right.
neighbor. So if the 20-foot distance is still not far enough for a 35-foot building, then you could also apply the tenting to the back or the terracing to the back.
It seems to me more of a homeowner's life and activities occur in the backyard than they do in the side yards. And so, the absence of your neighbor looking over you in the backyard is as or more important as it is in the side yard,
Yeah.
in my view.
Yeah.
And, we've had one instance, it's, as I've looked at the backyards where the, current code allows even up to 45 feet, it seems to me if the second or third story is stepped back, it makes a huge difference from that property owner who's on a lot that's at a lower elevation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the 25-foot height limit at the perimeters makes tons of sense. If it's a rear-facing lot, I also personally think that's a good idea to have a setback for that reason. Obviously, it's less buildable area, but it kind of respects your neighbor a little bit, keeps the buildings back. I think that's a fine option.
But if we're applying the 25-foot at 10-foot setback and then 1 foot in for every foot up at 20 feet, we're at 35 feet.
At 10 feet.
No, at 20 feet. We're at 35 feet.
Oh, that's the side.
That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
So if we're applying the same thing for the back that we're doing for the sides, then we would have no tenting on the back because we have a 20-foot setback on the back.
It would depend on whether you measure from the property line or the setback line. I would tent the back from the setback lines, and so that you have the same thing where you start at 25 feet at the setback and go up to 35 in the back.
Okay.
You start at 25 feet at the
Setback,
property line and go,
No, at
At the
setback.
setback.
So he'd be 25 feet at 20 feet back from the back, at the back.
okay, I thought you had said from the property line.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very helpful.
Can you expand on the ability to use a parallel plane model and the simplicity of that? I mean, tell us from a planner or a designer's perspective, architect's perspective. We've had concern that it's not workable. Can you describe your experience with it, please?
Yeah, so, when a client comes to you, the first thing they usually hand over is the survey. And so everyone has a starting point of the topography. That's your base point. So once you have that file, then you can you can essentially establish your tent right there after modeling, modeling, extruding that topography, which is very simple. The concern that was brought up at the last meeting is that if you have an existing property and it's not just an open lot, then you do have to interpolate some of the contours. You might have to connect some contours across the flat portion of the foundation of a house that's existing. But outside of that, it's extremely simple. You just you take your topography and you extrude that to whatever height you need, and it sets your tent, and it's pretty straightforward and easy from an architect standpoint.
I was gonna say, anybody else have any additional questions?
Good.
Okay, yeah.
Alex Robinette, 2500 Hatley. Okay, on the two models you have at the back, one of them is taking the tenting from the side setback and the other is taking it from the property line. We've observed in Rollingwood that the difference between the property line and the side setback can vary greatly by several feet, higher or lower depending. Do you have any insight into whether or not holding the side setback line as the datum for the tenting works better or worse or the same as along the property line?
So there, at our previous meeting, there was some good commenting about that. That the perimeter of the property, by nature, might be the best point to take native grade, because the houses are only allowed to develop within the setbacks. So in theory, native grade is kind of it's most true at the property. So in that sense, it kind of it makes sense to take it from the property line versus the setback, where it may have already been graded quite a bit to work with the existing property. So I think that makes sense. But I guess as you alluded, maybe you have a lot of varying topography from the setback to the property line. So if that's the case, say you have a steep slope from the setback to the property, then your tents actually will vary. But if it's relatively subtle grade, then if you overlay those two, it's actually fairly insignificant, the difference between the two, because you start at 25 at the setback or at 15 at the property line. So the tents are pretty comparable. Outstanding the fact that you just said that you have a lot of steep change at that section. So I don't know if that was a good answer or not, but yeah.
Go ahead.
Could I ask a follow-up question on that? In walking around my area in the neighborhood, there are a number of lots where the grade at the property line is much different than the grade. There is a significant change of the grade at the property line versus the grade at the setback, particularly where a road has gone through and the road is lower than the surrounding property. A road has been cut through a hillside or part of a hillside. So the lots on either side are either above grade here and below grade here as compared to at the setback line as compared to at the property line. So if you have that situation, let's say an example, there's a house at the corner of Nixon and Park Hills, and the change in grade is probably 10 feet within that 10 feet between the property line and the setback. How would you modify either parallel plane or the segment approach for that kind of situation?
I'm struggling to understand that, but so in my mind, the only thing I can imagine is there's like a retaining wall at the
Some
property
cases
line.
there are retaining walls, some
because-
cases it's just rough ground with a lot of rock.
I see. Yeah, I don't think I have a good answer for that,
Okay.
for a very specific lot or a condition. If it happens everywhere, I guess that's something that probably needs to get accounted for, but I'm not sure I have a good advice
Okay.
there. Sorry about that.
You know, it seems to me that in that situation, measuring from the property line to get your datum for your base height makes sense, because if your lot goes up to the neighbor, slopes up to the neighbor, and they're gonna build, they're already kind of looming over you because they're up on a hill, they're uphill from you. But if you measure from the property line, that mitigates their height a little bit, or keeps it down a little bit, because you're measuring from a lower point, it seems like to me. And so it's better to measure from the property line. And likewise, if your neighbor is down below you and they're gonna build, they're not gonna be looming over you as much, if you, because they're downhill, right? So they're not gonna be as imposing even if they're tall. And so you give them a little extra height, it's not gonna hurt you, if you, by measuring from the property line, which is higher than the setback line. Does that make sense? Alex,
Not quite.
no?
It does to me.
It-
Does it?
Yes,
Yes, it does.
if you have a house behind you, then measuring it from the street you'd loom over the house behind you instead of the one.
Well, no, you'd measure the back line from the back lot rather than the back setback line. I'm talking about for the tenting purposes, to get your initial 25 feet. But anyway, that's okay. If my question wasn't clear, or if you don't have an answer for it, it's okay.
Okay.
Alex will tell me later what she thinks.
I think what Brooke was trying to say, it took me a minute to place the house you're talking about, but it's a corner house, and the topography goes probably up 10 feet before you get to the house. And so if you
The
were-
setback line.
Yeah, and so, but the height is 10 feet, just a solid rock. So even if you pretended like it wasn't a corner lot, where you have a 30-foot side setback, it would say it's, that house goes up steeply 10 feet before you get to the setback. If you were to set your tenting line at the property line, you couldn't build.
You have no house.
Right.
No
Yeah.
house.
It's too severe.
I can see that as well,
Yeah,
yes.
it's a 30-foot setback,
Yeah.
but whatever.
I understand too.
That's the point that she was trying to make.
I think we'd have to look at that.
Yeah, so it's better just measure from the height from the setback line. It seems a lot simpler.
It is the buildable area after all.
Right, no, it makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna let the record reflect that at 7:37, Brian Nash arrived, so there is now a quorum for the Planning and Zoning Commission, so we will call the P and Z meeting to order at 7:37 also, so,
Thank you for doing that.
welcome. Okay, is there any other questions from council or P and Z members? From anybody in the audience
I-
for,
Since we have a quorum now, I guess I do have a question. When you say that using the parallel plane method is simpler to do than doing the segmenting method, can you just give, just based on these samples that you have here, okay, roughly how much time did it take you to do one or any of those samples using the parallel plane versus using the segmenting method?
Maybe a third of the time. I would say it's super quick. It's very easy. Not that the other ones are extremely difficult, but obviously you could tell that the odd shaped lot took a long time. But yeah, just kind of speaking around in my office, going over these diagrams, from an architect standpoint, the parallel plane just seems extremely easy to understand and kind of a democratic choice for your, all lots. It just seems like you have the topo, you extrude it, and that's kind of the end of it. there's implications with, I think, either options, or any of the options, but I think from a simplicity point of view, you have a survey, you extrude the survey, there's your buildable area, it's understandable to everybody involved, there's no questioning, there's no interpretation, and so I guess that was our takeaway from looking at the diagrams, strictly just the diagrams.
Okay, I'm gonna press that a little further.
Yeah.
And, we've been going around on parallel plane and trying to understand how it works here for well over a year. And a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from various people that have weighed in on this has been, I just can't get my mind around this idea of taking the topography and adding 35 feet to, I just can't see it. How does that work? How does that work? And you've done a really good job here, I think, of showing that now graphically. Now, if you had a client come into your office, do you think that it would be easier to explain what the limitations of building a house on a given property using the parallel plane method would be any easier than if you had to say, we're gonna have to segment this property according to these rules, and this is what we're allowed, it's gonna take me a minute to figure out what you're allowed to do within this versus what you're allowed, could you say a little more?
Hands down, absolutely simpler and easier to say, here's your topography, here's your building height limit, kind of end of story. I would, if Austin had this, I'd be happy with a parallel plane versus having to figure out these diagrams, the 10 diagrams.
Okay.
Now, can I say Austin, architects love the McMansion ordinance because it demands an architect.
Yep, go up to the dais, please.
It's like orthopedic surgeons love pickleball.
Casey Hoffman, 2800 Hatley. When you talked about the amount of time using the two different methods, are we talking about an hour, 10 hours? What's the difference? You said it's 3 times as much. Can you help me with
Just
that?
for these diagrams, 45 minutes to set up the file for the parallel planes, and maybe, depending on the lot shape and the lot complexity, hour and a half.
Okay. And thank you. And my second question has to do with when a house is torn down and what's the opportunity to change the topography so as to gain height advantage? Can you manipulate the topography before you start the measuring process?
Is that a question for me? Yeah. For anybody, yeah. That was kind of what I alluded to a little bit earlier, is when you do have an existing property, you'll get the survey. If the house is not demolished, they still give you the survey showing the foundation and the building outline. And that's usually what we get. And so we'll do our best to find natural grade, and you do have to interpolate the grade. You can see it on this property that we're looking at actually had a property, I think almost all of them that we were given had a house on them in the survey. So we clear the geometry of the house, and we take contours and we have to connect them in a way that seems natural or seems most straightforward. So there is some kind of interpretation there, and you can see that here on this lot. This kind of square portion of the lot is where the house sat, so it is flattened. Where I would assume that native grade originally, maybe however many years ago, would have been a little bit more of a gradual slope from the high point here to the low point there. So, but at the moment that you're given the survey, you work with what you're given. That's kind of all we have to work with.
What if it's land that hasn't been built on, or they really scraped a lot, there's no foundation, there's no nothing, they present you with dirt?
So they've hired somebody and cleared the lot flat or something like that.
They added filter, I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing is that, we start with the survey. The first thing that anyone does in order to obtain a building permit start the process, is to hire a survey and survey the piece of property. And that becomes your ground truth for everything that you do afterwards. And so I don't believe in rowing, well, you're not allowed to scrape your property. You can't just go in and scrape the property. You can get a survey, ask for a permit to do something. But, Nikki, you wanna help me here? Is that true?
Nikki Stotzenberger Development. I mean, you can get a demolition permit, which is your sticks and bricks, but I mean, you can get. I mean, I've seen a few homes that have been demolished. Foundation has been removed, and that's all they do with the property, and then they're selling the property. So my question kind of is who's going to say which survey they're gonna go by? And there's a pre-demolition, which we go out and we look at the lot, checking its condition. You've got your survey at that point, and we have your native ground survey taken, which is a portion of your demolition permit, so we have that. And then once the home is demolished, you know, we go out there just to make sure everything's safe. But other than that, you're not really gonna know. So I do understand. And I don't know how that could be worked in.
But,
Yes, ma'am.
but you don't typically have anybody come in after the demolition and raise the ground. I mean, I've never seen that. I've seen them lower it, but I've never seen them
Yeah.
raise it.
Well, I
You-
thought,
That's correct, but I'm not saying that, I guess, that it really couldn't.
So,
I thought people weren't allowed to cut and fill without a permit, and that you have to have a survey of the grade before they cut and fill, so that you
Right.
can,
Yeah, it would be site development, but
but what?
I don't see somebody that couldn't do it in a day or something
You
of
mean
that
do it
nature.
illegally? It
Yes.
can be, okay,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So-
I don't know how
so
we
you're
would
saying-
get them if you did it illegally.
Okay, well, if they do it illegally, they do it illegally, and the law deals with them accordingly. You know, we deal with that. But if they're doing it legally,
If they're doing it legally,
then it's not a problem, because
Right.
they have to have a survey before demolition to mark the grade. They have to go down to the foundation, I believe what it is, and can't remove the foundation during demolition, and then that's your grade. And then they can't cut or fill without a permit. So that's the rules. We already have all that covered in the rules as best we can.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
Good.
Right. I had one more comment for the gentleman's question. And that is, there is a concept in the current CRCRC proposal that you could, we're setting, the way it's drafted is, and it's still in proposed form, the height limits are based on native grade. But the proposal does include a provision to allow excavation. And when excavation would be done, then the height would be measured from the low point of the excavation. But I just wanted to make sure you were aware that that was one of the concepts that's in the proposal.
Is there a large staff that keeps their eye on every single property that's being demolished or torn down? And how, these things are happening so fast at Rollingwood. Somebody could come in one day,
Okay.
get rid of a house, get rid of the lot, the foundation, and who knows, except for the neighbors, who knows what's happening and what's legal and what's illegal.
The process today, and our city development officer is Nikki Stotzenhauser. Stotzenberger. I was going blank on that. Our ordinances require that permits be filed before work is done. And
Permits filed by the homeowner.
by the homeowner or the project developer, yes. In some cases, it's a builder, in some cases, it's it's the person who will own the home once the home is built. But those permits are required, and we also have a process where our code enforcement officer, who's one of our police officers, is viewing everything in Rollingwood at least once every 2 weeks. And hopefully we're catching that before it gets out of hand. Yes. Yes. So I don't know if Nikki wants to supplement what I've said, but
I'm not sure it's realistic to catch people doing illegal, excavating or filling but it is like while they're doing it and stopping them, but but it is realistic that we'll catch them after the fact. And it is a violation, and I believe there's a daily fine that could be like up to $5,000 a day for something to that effect. If that's the maximum, I think that we can impose. But I think we've moved our fines up to the maximum.
we did have a demolition that was being done without a permit, and it was stopped about 3 days or so into the work because a neighbor noticed it and noticed that there was no permit posted. So some of these rules that seem like they're the requirement to post a permit on the property allows a homeowner to know no permit's been filed. And so, we are trying to be much more straightforward about that and enforce those requirements that seem pretty simple. But that's why we have them, is so that we can identify when work is not being done when there's no permit, when it's not being done according to the permit.
And the people are pretty vigilant in Rollingwood about watching what's going on in their neighbors. I know, because I get the emails from saying, what's going on with this house?
Yes.
Okay. Brian, did you have something?
Oh, I was curious. Thank you, Sarah. You mentioned that there is a restriction that would keep someone from doing site work. Because I do know there's restrictions obviously on a demo, which involves there being an existing building, but I wasn't aware, or I guess I'm curious to know what the restriction is on, because people do, obviously landscaping work and things like that. We don't have like landscaping permits that are required, so I'm
You're
curious.
correct.
So you could kind of do some amount of, I don't know what this is called, terraforming or something like that, but like you can work with earth
You could, yes.
if there's nothing on
And
the
if you're
property.
going to be putting in, a retaining wall or anything like that, that's gonna require a permit just because of its structural nature. But it's just, without a landscaping permit, you're not gonna know until the work is starting to be done of exactly what's going on, and then, eyes on the project, you ask the question, what is happening here? And if they
And-
are putting up, walls and doing those kinds of things, that's when, you'll have to stop the project, but
But it's on its own, like
On its
a
own.
vacant lot, residentially zoned, wouldn't require like a landscaping permit to do landscaping work.
no. Not just landscaping, no.
That's helpful, thank you. That was my question.
Alex Robinette, 2500 Hatley. A couple of clarification points. One, in our CRC recommendations, we had, and I don't have the wording in front of me, but we were allowing people to kind of rectify the native grade if they demoed a house, because we didn't think it would be fair to penalize somebody based on what somebody else had done. And if there were like weird outcroppings or an old pool or some pond or some irregularity, we were saying you could just clean that up. And I think that even on one of these lots, you just interpreted what those topos would be. You just basically drag them across. And in my research of other cities that use parallel plane, I looked specifically for how do they address that, and that's what they did. They found somebody like Nikki or K-Freeze or whomever to sort of validate that this is a good approximation of what this site probably looked like beforehand.
And we're gonna just refer to that as native grade?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay, any more
Alright.
questions?
I have a question for you. So,
No.
we're here on like a joint meeting, and we're here on, what, a recommendation from CRCRC on their building height recommendation, is that what we're doing? And so
We're
then,
here for a public hearing.
yeah, I understand that, but then, we're also, have the opportunity for P and Z to vote, their recommendation in favor or not in favor of, the building height measurement. No?
It's not on the agenda.
It's not posted for action today,
Not even by P and Z?
not even by P and Z.
Okay. I thought P and Z was gonna get to vote on whether they recommend or don't recommend something in particular here. But I'm clearly
They
mistaken.
will, it's just not posted for this meeting. This
What-
was posted just for.
No, no, I understand. So that was my question for Dave, was when,
Yeah,
what meeting are we
what-
doing?
What happened at the last P and Z meeting, and we'd probably be going on to the next agenda item, regular agenda item here, is the questions that P and Z members had made caused us to ask for additional things on this modeling. For instance, one P and Z member asked, well, you know, it's difficult for me to understand the size of these things. Could you put a 6-foot man on these so that I can see what these projections look like?
Or woman.
Or a woman.
Yes, a
Human,
woman.
human,
With
okay?
heels.
6-foot human. Another was suggested that we actually place a house inside each one of these things so you could see what the impacts of each of the modeling methods or the restrictive methods would do. What would it do to the house that you put in there? If we get past this section here, I'm going to be asking for additional appropriation to enable that to happen. That is what P and Z had asked for. But, that said, you folks have the opportunity here to turn me down and say, well, enough is enough. I don't know that what you asked for as far as us doing a vote, I don't know, that would be up to legal counsel to be able to say.
It's not on the agenda. Right.
Sorry, I just
Not on,
Okay.
not on the agenda.
I
So,
can't find it on the agenda.
so we are going to move on from,
Well,
no,
if I might, Mayor Pro Tem,
yes.
I would point out that in item number 5, the second document is the actual draft ordinance that P and Z would need to vote on, or at least issue their recommendation for approval or disapproval before we can take up, before the city council can take up that action here at the council level. So that would be, I just want to point out, you can find the draft ordinance by going to this item on the agenda. The item number 5, draft ordinance, is the ordinance that would be up for a vote when P and Z sets their meeting to vote on it.
Right. Okay. We are gonna move to item number 5, which is the public hearing and discussion on the assessment of residential building height and proposed height measurement. And before we start taking public comment, I just want to, I asked about this at our last city council meeting because it seemed very alarming to me, the wording that was on here. This is the flyer that, the mail out that came to all residents about this hearing, where it says, the city of Rollingwood is holding a hearing that will determine whether you may lose the right to continue using your property for its current use. Please read this notice carefully. That is very sensational and alarming, and apparently it is a legal requirement to use that wording. So, I just wanted to point out that it is also not accurate, because nothing that we are talking about here will cause you to lose your ability to use your property for its current use. Changing the code does not mean you have to go in and modify your house if it doesn't meet the revised version of the code. You can keep your house. So I just wanted to make sure that nobody's freaking out that what we're talking about doing is going to cause, horrible changes in what they're allowed to do with their home, because that is not accurate. So, just to lay that out before we take any other comment. Did anybody sign up, Michaela? Okay.
There were two of them. I mean, it's
Anybody
fine.
decide they want to make comments that did not sign up? Everybody got their comment in before we got to public comment then? Oh, I guess I didn't officially open the meeting. Okay. We opened the public, well, I didn't say at what time. We opened the public hearing at 8 o'clock. There are no comments, so we will close the public hearing at 8:01. All right, so that moves us to agenda item number 6.
Okay.
Discussion and possible action based on a recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding the appropriation of additional funds for Ultra Studio, a third-party architectural firm, to present additional graphical models of the two proposals in discussion before the Planning and Zoning Commission to address building height measurement, and tenting. So I will let you take this one, Dave.
All right,
and
very good.
explain what it is.
I'll just, pick up where I tried to leave off on the last city council meeting. P and Z did have its meeting here several weeks ago, and Sam Alamo had done essentially the same presentation that you've just seen. And the discussion went much further and much deeper.
Not to
But-
say we're better, but
More of it. It was more of a quantity than a quality thing. So,
ow, sick burn, Dave.
Well, you missed the first half of that meeting.
That's
So,
true.
That's right, that's right. So, anyway, but there was a very good response to Outer Studio's presentation, and you could see light bulbs going off all around the room whenever these two sets of projections were being put up on the screen in 3D. One of the P&Z members had expressed concern that the setback line for a two-story house was not necessarily achievable under a parallel plane, and it was that concern that if you use the parallel plane on some lots, you may not be able to get a full two-story end-to-end, setback to setback. And I guess that's probably true with segmenting as well, but that was the statement that was made, and it was kind of a powerful statement.
Well, you could get 2 stories at each point, they just wouldn't be 2 continuous stories.
Well, that's
right?
exactly it. The thing is that assumes that there would actually be no excavation at all, and if there was any excavation, you could probably get 2 stories, you could get 20 feet of ground space, so.
Right.
But that was one of the discussion points that took a lot of time. Older Studio had stated that working under the parallel plane method was much easier and more straightforward than segmenting. And after lots of discussion, these things were asked by the P&Z members. Just kind of rounded them all up together. First off, we have a demonstration here for the parallel plane. We have a demonstration here for the segmenting method. Could we have a similar projection made using the current ordinance the way that it is today? So that was one request. Could we include a flat roof building placed within the envelope of each of these methodologies? Could we show what it looks like to put a building inside there? And could we apply a 312 roof to that building and do it again? So how does it look with a flat roof building? How does it look with a 312 roof? Again, include a human form to give each viewer some sense of scale. And then the request was made to place elevations on the corners of each of the breakpoints the corner intersections that show the maximum limits of the methodology being shown there. So you could actually see the elevations. You could see, well, if you look at one versus the other, you can say, well, the elevation is a little bit different at the cutoff point here. Is it significant? What? So if those elevations could be posted on there, it might be helpful for somebody who's making a comparison. So with that in mind, I can only say that Alder Studio so far has done exactly what we have asked them to do. These things that I just mentioned here are new things that the P&Z is asking to be added to our request to Alder Studio. It's effectively increasing the scope of what's being asked of Alder Studio. And in order to do that, and I've gotten some numbers back, we would need to increase our appropriation. So there was enough in the appropriation not only to cover the P&Z meeting and presentation, there was enough to cover this evening's meeting. We're pretty much out of money now. This is it. If we want to do something else or have them come back and do another presentation or whatever it is we want to do, we're going to need more money to do it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are all these requests that you just listed, and I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Yes.
Is that just a collection of of various individual members' requests, or is that something that P&Z voted on and
We motioned it.
and agreed to ask for that?
Yeah, we pretty much ended the meeting with that, with a motion to take these things and request from City Council permission to do it and the money to do it.
Okay, thank you for your clarification.
Yeah.
And do you have an estimate from Alter Studio what the cost of this modeling would be and what the time frame might be?
So far, Alder Studio has given us an estimate of $1,600 for the work that was initially requested. That did not include this meeting. What they're asking for in order to include the what I just said, those 5 points, would be an additional $1,600. What we have appropriated is $2,500. So we're running a little bit short. And again, the initial $1,600 did not include a second meeting. So we're gonna need a little bit more money in order to get, we've got this meeting paid for because we appropriated $2,500. I only needed $1,600, but we don't have enough to have them do these 5 additional pieces and then come back.
We don't have a number.
We do. We have $1,600. They said they would do it. Okay.
I have another question. Is there a P&Z meeting that's been publicly noticed yet for them to actually make a recommendation on this proposed ordinance one way or the other?
Yes, we have motioned to, the expectation, based on what the discussion was at the last P&Z meeting, is that we would not be able to achieve a P&Z quorum at this public hearing. So therefore, we motioned to schedule a public hearing for P&Z on May 7th. Now, that motion goes away because we've just done the public hearing. We're good. But,
But we still need a notice of hearing to get your vote on your recommendation.
I don't believe that's
That's
true.
not a hearing.
Oh,
I don't believe
it's
that's
not a
true.
hearing, it's just a public
Public-
meeting.
We
I'm
just
sorry.
do it in a P&Z meeting. So we could have Alders, provided that we get the appropriation, we could have Alder Studio come back and fill in the spaces on these 5 things. We could not have him come back if you decided that you didn't want to appropriate the money for these things. We could do that. But in any case, P&Z is essentially ready, we're ready to vote. If I would probably motion to vote on this evening if the word action were on here somewhere. So,
So are you still gonna have a meeting on May 7th, did you
Yeah,
say? And
it's-
is that
yeah.
when you expect to vote?
It's, well,
Setting aside
It's regret-
questions of the
yeah.
Alter Studio
yeah,
work.
it's regrettable that I won't be here for the April P and Z meeting. And that's kind of what part of the motivation was anyway, but. Jean, you have something to say?
Well, I don't
Please.
understand the wording on the agenda when it says discussion and possible action
Mhm.
based on a recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding the appropriation of additional
Well,
funds.
what?
I mean, is that specific to the appropriation of
Yeah,
additional funds?
That's all.
That's all it is, all right.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
Sadly,
And it's not our action either, I
Right,
think it's just a
right,
city,
right. Yeah,
city
yeah, yeah.
agenda item,
Okay.
right?
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
We'd love for there to be action, would be really cool.
It would be
Wouldn't
really
it?
cool, we
Yeah.
would love it.
We would love action this evening, but we can't.
Okay.
So I guess, all I can say is I put it to you, are we going to get an appropriation? Or there's nothing that stops P and Z, there was some discussion, the possibility of having a P and Z meeting on April 4th still exists. It hasn't been canceled yet, and P and Z could have a meeting on April 4th, and in that meeting, I would expect that a vote would be taken.
well, may I make a motion?
I have a question. What's the time frame if the council were to approve the additional $1,600 for this work, when could it be done? Do you have that information?
I'm to understand from Odor Studio that they could actually make it for the April 4th meeting. They could do it.
Isn't April 4th a Friday?
April 2nd will be the next
Is April 4th, the next P and Z meeting, whatever that schedule is, I'm sorry, I don't have my calendar in front of me.
The 2nd? Okay.
The second, actually? Okay.
It'll be next
Second,
next
April
Wednesday.
Did we have a quorum for that?
Well, I don't know. Michaela, can you tell me? Good question.
If we give you the money, will you promise to vote?
Well,
I won't be
I
here.
have one more question too. I have a couple more questions.
That was, Mr. Glasheen, one thing that we had established is that should we have the public hearing for P and Z on May 7th, it would ride on the condition that a vote would be taken immediately after the public hearing. And we motioned that, and all agreed. But that was for May 7th.
Thank you.
Okay.
So as of right now, I have 3 confirmed yeses. I have not heard back from 2 members of planning and zoning, and then I do have 2 noes, which would be Jerry and Dave.
Say that again, please.
So we don't yet have a quorum for that meeting. We have 3 members who confirmed yes, and I have not heard back from 2 people.
3
Two
yeses, 2 noes, and 2 no
2
answer.
no responses. That's right.
Are any of the no responses sitting in this room right now?
That is correct.
Well, yeah, Jerry did. Oh, I don't.
And the people that did not answer.
Oh, I have trial on in like next week, or,
April
yes.
Next Wednesday.
I think I already said that, right?
Okay. I can't recall, but
Yeah, I had said that I've got, unless it goes away, but I won't be able to do
The safest time to plan a vacation is when you're set for trial, because they all settle. So, safest time to set a meeting is during your
it.
trial.
That's fair. That's
Okay.
fair. You're playing the odds.
As a trial lawyer, I think.
That's fair.
Well, does the $1,600 also include a second presentation by Alter Studio with the additional information to the council?
No. No. What I would recommend, even though I know that Alder Studio has only asked for an additional $1,600, I would recommend that we ask for $2,500, the same appropriation that we had gotten the first time, and just keep the change when it's done.
And maybe you can help me, but I'm having a hard time seeing how any of this information requested is helpful or necessary. This doesn't seem that complicated anymore after we've talked about it for 2.5 years. And we've got a fairly simple, straightforward proposal on the table, and we've got 2 great architects who are volunteer residents who are sitting here who can explain things to us outside the meeting or during the meetings. I just don't see it. But maybe you can help me, because I wasn't at your meeting where it was requested.
You know, you go through this stuff and you talk about it for 3 hours, and people ask for things, and you know that you can't get a vote that night. And you just agree that, well, we'll go ask city council if we can do this thing. I just want to progress it, not drop the ball. Do I think that it will make us a whole heck of a lot of difference personally? No, I don't.
I'm just concerned about basically filibustering,
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Just to address your comment, I think what I understood the reasoning behind it was that there was just concern that we should have some real house put through the process, like this is a house that would have passed but now wouldn't, or this is a house, just so that there can be a visualization of this is what it means can't happen. And if that is like some random house on Park Hills that I think comes up as an example all the time, people will be like, okay, we're fine. But if it's like some other house, I think people just kind of want to see like the real world visualization of it.
Yeah.
And I think that was what was driving it, Kevin, was this idea of like, okay, we think we all understand now what parallel plane means, because I think that concept took a bit, even though I know the CRCRC did a really good job of vetting a lot of that. And I think now the last step was just, okay, let's start seeing some real world things. I think you mentioned the 6-foot person, and I think the house was an important part for some of the other P&Z members of just wanting to see how it plays out.
One of these
And for the public too, I think.
One of these properties is Tony Stein's rental property, that he had plans drawn up to knock down and build another place. We have those plans, and of course we've used the topography here for this modeling. And what we had planned to do was use his plan and then stick it inside the model and see how it would show up on, at least on his property. And then we'd probably take that same house and stick it in the other places as well. But that's where that was gonna be our starting point.
Okay.
So.
That's
and
what I
that-
wanna see. That's what I wanna see.
Yeah, I think
That's what you
Totally.
want to see?
I mean, I thought this whole thing was gonna be that, and then I saw this, and I was like, okay, what it is like, it's just showing like on different, like, show a house, because that's what we talked about, like a lot of the discussions early on too, were like showing pictures and then overlaying a house and showing the drawings of like how this proposal, so I thought that's what we were getting. So I would personally wanna see a house. It just seems kinda obvious to me, but.
And Kevin, for what it's worth, the people that I've talked with about it are like, yeah, I click on the things that you guys put on the agenda packets, but I never really see a good picture of like a house with the proposal on it. And I think we were just trying to create the material so that if the public does want to comment on it, they've got something they can look at and grok as well, like understand. Because we have been dialoguing about it for a long time. Totally agree. This was just the last visual aid part. So.
The bottom line is that this all could happen on May 7th, and P&Z is committed to completing the task on May 7th. And we have a quorum already established for May 7th.
There we go.
Yeah.
Alex Robinette, 2500 Hatley. So the Park Hills house that you referenced would still be built exactly as is under the segmented proposal. It would not be built as is with parallel plane, because there's nothing, it does tenting on its own, and there's nothing that protects that front facade from going to 45 feet with segmenting. So we've showed it to you 12 ways from Sunday, and we're not allowed to show you the actual drawings. And so we've done everything we can to represent it as best we could. So, and that was the house that brought us all here, so.
I would like to address, I've heard two different things about what's proposed for this additional work. One is to have a generic flat roof house and a generic gabled house and use that through the different models. Then I hear, no, we're going to use Tony's building plans to do that. And I think that is not a wise thing to do, because that is,
It personalizes it.
it personalizes it for one thing, and it's not generic enough to be useful across the community. The other thing I would say, the second point would be, I don't think modeling the current ordinance gets us anywhere, because we all know what the current ordinance does in real life. So modeling it, I don't think is, I don't know what useful information we would get from that.
We have real world examples out there already to
Right.
point to.
And if we want to show the scale of a human being with these models, that seems pretty simple and probably pretty low cost. And then the last item, to show the elevations on the corners, when this came up before planning and zoning, I don't think that's useful either, because it doesn't address the ability that's in the current proposal to excavate on the high side. And we talked about that at quite some length. It doesn't show you what can be built, because it doesn't take into account that if you have a 10-foot change in grade and you're across, from side to side, and you want a first story, you can build that first story at the lower elevation. So I don't think that gives us anything that's relatable to what the proposed ordinance would do, or anything that anyone suggested. There's not a recommendation that this model would reflect, these additional modeling items would reflect if we were to do them. So my thought is that if we have, I appreciate everything you've done, Sam. I think you've done a great job. If we do something additional, it would be to put the human form on these models to show the scale. And then if we could come up with a generic roof line, house with a roof line, or house with a gabled roof, house with a flat roof and house with a gabled roof, I think that would be helpful. I think it just takes a little bit more time to, I've seen this presentation twice, and seeing it the second time, it's a lot easier to see what can be built within the model. And so I think we need to now focus on, actually, I think it would be better work to focus on what we actually want in the ordinance. And then if there's still a sense of uncertainty about whether that fits our community, then we have Sam model that. I don't see any useful exercise in having Sam model something now that we don't know that we have at least some consensus that it would be a good plan. So that would be my recommendation.
I agree with everything you just said. It's the first time.
You're coming along.
I mean, 100%. So I just
Thank you.
note that.
Could I make a motion to approve the appropriation of additional funds for Alter Studio to do the things that were requested by planning and zoning in their last meeting that they all voted on and approved and recommended to us? That's my motion.
And we have a motion. Is there a second?
And it's up for up to $2,500.
Is there a second?
We have discussion after the second? Is that
Yes.
right?
Is there a second?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna second it for discussion.
Okay.
Because I agree with everything that Brooke said about it in terms of it. It doesn't strike me as being completely necessary, but I want to talk about it for a minute. And I also agree with Councilmember Brown's point about how we may, once we get to an ordinance we want to pass, we might then want to model that instead of keep modeling this proposal. You know, does that make sense to you?
It makes sense, but I think we have that. Like, that's what's in like, it's
Well,
like we
right.
have the draft ordinance, and that's what we're saying, so.
Right.
And, okay, well, I guess I need to study the draft ordinance. It's got the 25-foot height tenting at the side setbacks and
Yeah.
rear setbacks.
I
Does it have
guess.
it on the rear setbacks? I don't know if it does, because I want them on the rear setbacks, so I know that.
It doesn't have it on the rear.
Yeah, I'd like to add
Under
it
the
to the
current
rear,
proposal.
is what I would think. So if we're gonna model something, I think, I'd like to know whether we have consensus that we wanna apply that to the rear setbacks too, which I think we should on the tenting.
What, well, okay.
Does that make sense?
I know what you want to do, but that is not what has been written so far.
I understand that.
Okay, so if, you know, what we've done is, we've not talked so much about the rear height because by our ordinances state that we have to have a 20-foot setback in the rear yard. And so if you're starting your setback, if you're starting your building height at 10 feet and then moving forward 1 foot increments, by the time you get to 20 feet, you're already at 35 feet.
Well, I'm talking about
But if you
measuring
want it to be
from-
something less than 35 feet at the rear line, if you want it to be something less than 35 feet maximum, then we would need to adjust the ordinance to state that. What would that be?
Okay.
What's the right number?
We are not posted to discuss the ordinance
Okay,
tonight. We are
Fair enough.
posted to discuss the appropriation.
fair enough.
I will say, in my opinion, $1,600, $2,500 is not that much. If that's what it takes to satisfy P and Z so that they can see what they wanna see and we can get a vote on this, I think that's money well spent, so we can just move
May-
on.
May I ask one more thing, okay? And I agree wholeheartedly with what Council Member Brooke had said. If, you know, right now, we're talking about using Tony Stein's house and putting it into.
It's the first I've heard of that tonight.
Oh, that was actually motioned. That was part of the motion in our P and Z meeting. That was it.
Was it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we
No,
discussed
I
it.
don't,
Yeah.
I don't think it was motioned to use Tony Stein's
Stein's.
house. I think it was
Offered.
motioned what you read out to us this evening, to do a flat roof build and to do a gabled build.
Pretty, well, when I went back and listened to the tape, that's what I got. Okay,
Well-
anyway, if it's not that, then how do we decide? I mean, what's modeled here is exactly what the ordinances say. This is the envelope that constrains the building. If we want to put something within that envelope, what is it? What do we say that is?
May I respond?
Sure.
Or may I
Go ahead.
respond? What we modeled is not what's in the draft, because it doesn't include the opportunity for excavation below the property line. And so that is why I really would like to take the time to develop the ordinance as P and Z would like to see it, or thinks they want to develop go through the ordinance, decide what changes they would recommend, and then decide whether or not we need to model that change. Because what we have in the current, in what Sam's presented tonight, it doesn't have the provisions in the ordinance for excavation. And it doesn't, so if we were to put in the flat roof, build and the gabled roof, we have to make additional assumptions about what that modeling, what the underlying ordinance will be. That's why I'm having difficulty with this.
I don't understand, I mean, this to me is flat roof. So I don't get the benefit of
Yeah, the flat
having the
roof.
flat roof, and may I just say that,
That's, the
Oh.
mayor pro tem should seek
it wa-
recognition
No,
from
no,
her.
it's okay, Jeannie, I didn't mean to, I was just signaling in
Good.
case there's an
I think
opportunity.
Jeannie had something she wanted
Yeah,
to
she's-
finish
she-
saying.
Yeah, I support that too.
But the person to
Keep going.
get
Keep going.
recognition is the mayor
going.
pro tem.
okay.
Okay, well, if everybody will be quiet, I will recognize Jeannie so she can finish her thought.
My only thought was, in response to Councilmember Brown's request for P and Z to go through their proposed ordinance and make changes as determined that the commission requests, that's gonna take another year. That's all my concern. That's all. I'm shutting
Well, I
up.
think that's a good point.
Can I just,
Go ahead.
is that okay? Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So, I was just thought I'd put some color, I don't think anybody was trying to use Tony's house as some like model of the perfect house. It was honestly to try and speed up the process and reduce expense, because if we're like requiring the architects to first design a gabled house and then design a flat roof house, and like Tony's already got plans and it's already in a 3D model form, so you could just pop this thing into these different models. So right now we've got these volumes, and they're like, as Jeannie pointed out, that one has like a flat top, but like nobody knows what that means, right? If you were able to take like Tony's designed house, and remember, this is not Tony's actual house, it was one that was designed by an architect and it has a 3D model already built. And if you could just take the 3D model, put it into that form and go, okay, see, this fits. This is a house that's like a 6-bedroom, 5,200 square foot home. It's a 3-story. It's got 6 bathrooms and a game room. And then everybody gets a little bit of a concept of like, oh, look, that fits in there really well. And that's a pretty big house with all the fancy things that people want these days. Whew, this sounds like it's gonna be fine. And if it doesn't though, then people will go like, well, oh, that was kind of a big house. And it was really just an idea of like, let's get some example homes in there so that when we're all talking about these volumes, instead of having to look at them in the abstract, you're able to look at them and go, yeah, this fits a 6,500 square foot home. We should all be fine with that, right? It's just to give that kind of perspective. So there's no like, Tony's not a developer and he's not looking to like see what he can get at. It was really just to come up with a couple of examples, and he has a model available. So we thought that would save a lot of time and money with the architects. And maybe we could get the Alter Studio folks to say what it might need to be if we didn't have that model. I don't know.
That's Tony's site as well, just so.
Yeah, that's Tony's site right there. And so part of it was like, okay, his prior architect had built that based off the existing provisions. And so it fits now. And then it was like, okay, now let's take that and put it in to the parallel plane version. And does it fit? And then if it doesn't fit, okay, well, so this will be an example of where somebody could have built something, but now can't. And it gives a little perspective on what that change from what we have now to what we wouldn't. And then we can debate whether, yeah, Tony had a really huge house design, or maybe he didn't, and everybody's like, oh, that seems like a reasonable house. Maybe we're not thinking about this the right way. It was kind of just give everybody some reassurance about it. Done. Thank you for the opportunity.
Given the fact that Tony already has plans, do we know what the maximum height on his current plans are? Do we know if he's going to the 45 foot, and is
No.
that what we're trying to show?
I don't know his plans,
No.
and he's
It-
not present.
It's actually a fairly modest house. But
So why
I
would-
haven't seen it in a very long time, you know, he actually did provide us with, the 3D file, and I don't personally have the software that allows me to see it. I do have the software that lets me see this stuff, but not that.
Well, is
So-
this his site? Is that Tony's site that's up on the screen right now? Because it looks like it's fairly flat and then it drops off precipitously right there at the back.
His site
one of
is, I believe, the 4902 Timberline. Is that what's up? Okay, yeah.
I think the discussion we're having right now, we don't know if Tony's house is big or small or generic or, you know, it seems to me that the exercise would be at planning and zoning, or in response to Mr. Nash's comments, I don't think we need to design an ordinance based on whether or not Tony can build the house he thought he could build 2 years ago. You know, it's under the current ordinance. So that's why I keep going back to, I really think it's not a good idea to do that. I think it would be perhaps useful to, if you want to do something, it's got to be generic. It's got to be, you could put, if you took this, the model that's shown on the screen now, you could say, what would be the height of the, what would be the slope of the roof if you put a gabled house there? What would be the slope of the roof if it's flat? And we already know that. We already know that. So it's problematic for me to say that we evaluate this ordinance based on whether a house that was designed several years ago could fit. I just think that's a bad idea. And so, and we don't have that, we don't have a written proposal here for us to evaluate for this money's gonna be spent on. So, I know there's a motion on the table. I would like to call a vote on the motion, and then, we see where we go from there.
May we recognize?
Yes.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, this provides no context. I cannot interpret this. We need I wanna see a house and like how it affects, take an existing house, but I hear we can't get plans for an existing house to see how this affects it. It seems very, like, just a basic question to be like, I think a lot of people would have this basic question, like, how does this affect what we could build like 2 years ago? How's that gonna affect this? Like, it just seems like, I understand like the outliers, the giant things, the houses that kind of like got us all talking about this, but then like I have no concept what this is gonna do in terms of like if I wanted to redevelop my lot, like I'd still, like that's why I think this is a great idea, because this is a house that was designed before. We can plug it in here, we already have it, it's easy, it's fast, like it doesn't seem like that big a deal to me. I mean, it seems like actually a really good test case for it. And if it gives people some context as well.
So you have a flat lot out. If you wanted to redevelop your house, it could be
Well,
35 feet
but
tall.
I'm just saying, it's like, but I'm saying other people, like, I don't know, like, why do you think it's taken like a long time to get this through? It's because people have like lots of opinions, and I do think that like being able to see something could just, like Mr. Nash said, it could be like, oh, this is like no big deal. And that's the other thing that I wanted to say is like the existing, if you had the existing, like what could build, like what was the existing like 3D model look like, then I have context. I can be like, why would I do that? You said that you didn't think it was a very good idea or not that useful, but it is useful because I can be like, I know what it's like around down there, and I can see it on the screen and be like, oh, I can at least visualize this. Like I have no reference like when I look at that. So that's why I think that what the recommendation of planning and zoning to like do this extra work is a good idea. That's just right now.
Oh.
And I also think that it can be done very quickly. Like it's not like we're talking about like we're still to have this May 7 meeting. Like this, they said they could get it done in a week or something. So I still don't understand. Yeah, personally, don't think this is going to slow anything down.
Alex?
I did want to say that Tony Stein's house overall, the overall height is 31.5 feet. So it may not be a good representation because it's gonna fit, because I've seen it. But that's not to say that it won't give you a chance to see a house within this envelope, but it's not maybe going to be a good example of one that's pushing the limits
It may push the limits on the edges.
on a 1 10-foot setback.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the tenting piece, but not on the height.
Okay. Nikki?
There is somebody on Zoom that would like to speak. Tony. His name is Tony.
Is that Tony Stein?
I'm not sure Tony Stein.
Or another time.
Okay. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one quick response to Councilwoman Brown's point about generic.
So,
Generic is in.
please identify yourself since we can't see
Oh,
anything. We don't know
sorry.
who you are.
Sorry, this is Tony Borleo, 2403 Vance Lane.
Okay.
And I was just using a quote unquote generic house is kind of pointless because you have to define generic. And I think what Alec is saying and what others are suggesting is if you take either Tony Stein's plans or other houses in the neighborhood that exist that push the boundaries of the current design or what would be a problem with the parallel plane, then people could say like, hey, yeah, that's objectionable, or that change is fine. But just saying quote unquote generic doesn't do anything because somebody has to define what generic is. And if you define it so that it fits within the ordinance, you're not proving anything within the models.
I second Councilmember Brown's call for a vote.
And may I,
She didn't make a motion, but go ahead.
may I be recognized?
Yes.
I've used the term generic, but all that the model would show us if we use Tony Stein's house is that it fits Tony Stein's house. I think we can be more, if we want that information, then I think what we need to do is say, what would be a 35-foot house that would fit within this? What would be the maximum 35-foot house, volume of house that could fit on this lot with this model versus the other model? But we can't really do the other model because we don't have all the parameters for the segment approach, because we know we don't have the other City of Austin criteria for that. And so I've got, what we're being asked to vote on is to spend $1,600, but I'm not sure what that $1,600 is gonna, what kind of plan is going to be used to place something within this tent. For example, had the proposal been a part of our package, we could understand a bit more what is going to be modeled. What was identified, a flat roof, what would show a flat roof at the maximum height, show a gabled roof at the maximum height. I think we can do that, and it will provide the volume of house that can fit within that model. I don't have any clue about whether Tony Stein's proposal is a good or a bad or a generic or a representative proposal. But I think it is not wise to base the way we view these models on a single example. I think we've got to be more generic about that and more thoughtful about what we're doing. And we've got to have it show us, for it to show us some useful information. You know, I could say, you can take my house plans from 1980 and put it in there, but that's not gonna show, it won't show anything other than whether my house will fit. It won't show us the information that we are really wanting, which is what volume of house can fit within this model versus that model on this particular type of lot. So I just don't see it being useful.
Jean,
Could we ask the architects, Samuel, maybe you would know, based on those criteria and what you modeled there, what the maximum volume would be for a home on each one of those lots, and that's it?
It's that.
It's a cubic footage.
If you don't
That's the
have an
maximum
impervious
Well,
cover,
really,
Like,
we
that's not a
want-
house.
it's that shape with
How many cubic feet is
The
that?
mansard roof.
Not cubic feet,
I'm
square
sh-
feet. We
No,
really,
it'd be cubic feet.
well, I know, but people are more interested in square feet for a home.
That's,
it
that.
depends on how many
Well,
floors you
both, I
put in
guess.
there.
I guess
setback thing,
both.
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess both,
Yeah.
really.
I think the maximum you could fit in there is that that shape with windows on it, and then depending on how many floors you fit
Uh-huh.
and how deep you excavate it is how big the house could be. If it's just a sense of scale that folks are looking for, my personal opinion, I don't know if this is the question, is that Tony's house would sit in there and you could see that's what one floor looks like, that's what a person looks like, and I think that would be helpful to understand scale. To try to determine what can fit in there, I think is maybe less I don't want, useless, you know, in my opinion, because it's infinite. So I do think it's,
Right.
if what you're looking for is a sense of scale, any house works. And to your point about the generic house, that gets a little arbitrary. Like, okay, do you want to see a 10-foot by 10-foot square, 2 floors with a gable roof and 2 windows and a door? Do you want to see a long house? Do you want to see it near the property? So it just, I think if you're looking for a sense of scale and you have a property already developed, just to plop it in there, I think that's going to get the intended result, in my opinion.
I like
I,
what he
I
said.
think all it will tell us is whether that house fits or not. You know, but,
maximum amount of square footage.
Yeah, but it depends on the shape of the house.
Listen, Sam said it perfectly. It's gonna give us context. And that's all I think they're asking for. And I mean, guess what? In the end, every house is gonna have to get proven under whatever we adopt, okay? And it doesn't matter whether it's generic flat or generic slope. And again, I think the fact that it give a visual representation that somebody could relate to, and I mean, I think it's gonna show that Tony's house doesn't fit. He's gotta do a few little maneuvers on the edges. So guess what? That's what it's gonna demonstrate. And it'll just be a good example.
Tony told me to reassure everybody that he does not have a permit, he has no intention to build. The plans are 4 years old. This is not about Tony's house, it's just an example.
Okay.
So it's the generic house, we just want something
Yeah.
to look at in that volume.
I don't think anybody thinks that.
Well,
That's
Can we
going on.
vote?
Okay,
Yes.
he just
Okay.
wanted me to reassure everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, to Duke's point, perhaps this is the best thing that we can do. If we do a generic thing, it's impossible to do that. Back to your point, we don't know if we got 10-foot floors, 12-foot floors, 15-foot floors. I mean, who the hell knows? You know, there's no way to represent that. So if this will get, if dropping Tony's house into the plans and showing it with the overlays is going to get some degree of clarity on the representation, then, you know, I think that that's as good as we're going to get. What really would work is to put forth the houses that people find egregious and put that in there and show the problems, but that's not an option that's on the table. So there we go.
Okay, I have one question for Alan. From a budgetary standpoint,
Yes, ma'am.
do you think that we have room in the budget for $2,500?
I believe so. I think it costs less to expend $2,500 now than to drag it on for another year.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there any additional discussion? We have a motion on the table. Michaela, can you read it to us again, since it's been,
I don't have the entire motion, but it's basically to approve the
Yeah.
appropriation of funds based on the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission, for, it's
Up
listed
to
out.
2,500.
Up to
Yes, yes.
okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I would like discussion on that motion.
That's what we've been discussing.
Yeah.
If you'll give me a little bit of room here, I'd like to point, there's a difference between what Dave Bench listed, the 5 items Dave Bench listed, and the concept that we're gonna use Tony's house for this model. And the difference is that when Dave read it out, he said we would use a flat roof building within each model and then a gabled roof building within each model. I don't know which Tony's is. I don't know if we're gonna come up with another model. I wanna know what it is that we're asking to be modeled.
Okay. The way that it was discussed in the P and Z meeting, if I may, the way it was discussed in the P and Z meeting is that we would use Tony Stein's model, which is a flat roofed house. And then to that, we would add a 312 pitch and use it again. So we would actually illustrate Tony's house in 2 different ways, as a flat roofed house and one with a 312 pitch, just for the sake of show. Now, I could have said that today whenever I was reading out my notes, and I apologize that I wasn't more specific. But Tony had already given me his 3D rendering that I've already passed on to Alter Studio, and they said they could do that.
Well,
And that was it.
Okay.
And that was what the pricing was based on.
Okay, thank
also, there was a proposal that it would model the current ordinance.
Yes.
Yes. All the above. Yes, it's very, like, what they approved, that's what we're voting on. That's it. Like, that's it. Or what they
But they-
recommend.
We don't have a house for the current ordinance.
That's my point. I wanna know exactly what it is we're asking to be modeled.
I don't think,
I know we're beating a dead horse, but I wanna know what we're asking Sam to do, so we'll know what it is we're getting back.
I don't think we need to model the current ordinance, because the current ordinance, we've already seen what we can do with that, and it's causing problems. That's why we're here today.
Sure, I'll admit in my
So-
motion to not model the current ordinance.
You accept
And-
that amendment, Kevin?
Yes.
All right, one more point. The elevation on the corners was in the P and Z proposal. Is that with or without the opportunity for excavation? It's in the current draft ordinance.
Do you want me to say something?
I'm asking a question. I wanna know whether or not the motion includes that or doesn't include that.
The way I envision it is that given the native ground as it is, we're showing the elevation above that native ground, irrespective of whether or not there's any excavation that is being done within the confines of the building footprint. It doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't matter.
Then why are we doing it?
Why are we doing what?
Modeling it if it doesn't matter.
What we're not modeling
It's
is
the
the
excavation.
possibility of excavating, because it's kind of a given. It's already built into the notion. You know, you're already working with native property. What happens within the scope of those walls, who cares? It doesn't matter. All we're doing is modeling against native topography. What the CRCRC recommendation tried to do was, in extreme cases, towards the back of a house, if you found yourself with a 35-foot wall, you might be able to dig down a little bit further and get yourself a walkout basement, and that was kind of it. It was kind of a grace for extreme cases. It wasn't like built in, like you can always excavate, or we ought to have additional footage in there for excavation. It was only a gimme for extremely sloped lots. That's really what that is in the ordinance, the way it's written.
Alex?
I would beg to differ, but all we have to decide now is whether that is useful information or not. And that was the question I had raised as to the motion.
I don't think that adds a whole lot of expense to put those on the corners. So, but Alex, go ahead.
I just want to point out, I didn't know you were gonna throw a 3-12 roof on Tony's house.
Okay.
It's a 3-story house, it's
Yeah.
gonna be a bit of a Frankenhouse. I don't think it was designed to have a gable roof stuck on it the way it's designed, so
Yeah.
expectations may not be met in that process. I don't know if, what you wanna allocate more money to Sam to shimmy the house around so that it makes sense that
I think that it's, the 3 stories flat is pretty much a maximum that can be put in a volume on with the constraints. And that's what I was saying when I asked for what is the maximum volume, because, and square footage is what realtors use, is square footage. They don't use cubic footage to sell houses. And if you're looking at, and that was one of the, I think the concerns of the P&Z was that we were going to adversely affect what people could build on their properties with the new ordinance. And I think the real message is they don't want to restrict the size of the homes so that we can't have nice size bigger homes. But if you look at what we have right there, we have 3 stories, 10-foot ceilings is about what, average. You could see that you can have a pretty large home still with the new ordinance. So that's what I was saying, what is the maximum, and that's exactly what I was thinking about. But Tony's will do that, because it's a 3-story house, flat roof, right? It'll do it.
You could probably build a 25,000 square foot house.
Yeah, you probably could. So actually what his is a good example that we can plug in and use.
I like it.
Well, I think the motion is to approve whatever P&Z had voted to request. And so I think that's what we're voting on, with the amendment of let's take off the
Like, we don't
existing
really need to have
ordinance
existing
one.
ordinance.
So
Because
with
we
that
know that
exception.
house was designed within the existing ordinance
Right,
anyway, so.
right. So that's the motion, and are we ready to vote? Can we call for a vote?
Yes. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
I'm abstaining.
Okay. So we have 4 in favor, 1 abstention. Motion passes. And that is the last item on the agenda. So is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Yay.
All right. Yay. You're adjourned.
I have the same